Again, here are our functions. I'll put a blue box around g of x and a green one around f of x. We want to find the explicit equation and state the domain again. So g of f of x. Well, f of x is the square root of x. And g of x says whatever you put in gets squared, and then you subtract 4. So it will be square root of x squared subtract 4. X subtract 4. And again, just like the example we just did, you look at that and you say, what's the domain? You're going to want to say everything. Because what's the domain of x minus 4? It is everything. But we have to go back and we have to check. We have to check anywhere that we're dividing and anywhere that we have square roots. Do we have square roots anywhere in here? We sure do, right at the beginning. And what can't we take the square root of? We can't take the square root of a negative. So our domain for this one is x has to be bigger than or equal to 0. For part B, f of g of x, well, g of x was x squared minus 4. And f of x says whatever you put in, you take the square root of it. So this will equal the square root of x squared minus 4. So there's our explicit equation. And this comes back to the thing that we were doing right from the beginning. What do we know about square roots? We can only take the square root of a positive number. So if I want to figure out the domain, I need x squared minus 4 to be bigger than or equal to 0. Where is it equal to 0? If you factor this, x plus 2, x minus 2, it's equal to 0 at negative 2 and 2. If you plug in 0, does it make it true? No, negative 4 is not bigger than 0. This part is false. If you plug in something less than negative 2, negative 5, it works. If you plug something larger than 2, it also works. No, it's not always like that pattern, but because this is a parabola, and the parabola would look like this, parabolas often switch back and forth like that. There are parabolas that touch it only once, where it can either be both positive or both negative. But for parabolas, it alternates. But we will see some functions where it doesn't. So then our domain is these sections, so it's from negative infinity to negative 2 included, or from 2 to infinity. Or you could write this like x is less than or equal to negative 2, or x is bigger than or equal to 2. You have to do it in two separate ones, because one of them is less than and one of them is bigger than. You can't put that together. Let's write a little note from what we've discovered in our last two questions. When finding the domain, you're going to check your final equation for non-permissible values and anywhere else you divided or square rooted. So notice in A, we got a final equation that the domain would have been everything But we had to check back further and notice, hey, we took a square root earlier, so we're going to have to change our domain. In the question we did before, when we checked earlier, we said, hey, earlier we were dividing by x minus 1, so we had to make sure that we listed that in the domain. Notice in B, we've got a square root in our final equation. If we check earlier, earlier is fine, right? X squared minus 4, that had a complete domain. It had no restrictions, no square roots, no dividing. Okay, I'm going to give you some time to try some of these. 3, 7, and 9.